your story is very similar to mine. And that early in practice, you could help a lot of people with some basic fundamental good nutrition and good replacement. And then it just seemed like the more you would help, the more of the sicker and sicker and sicker would start showing up, or the ones that you helped to a point wouldn't you would plateau out, and then you'd have to figure out, you'd grow with them basically. I've done a lot of growing, I'm sure, as you have over the years, as
Oh
you've
yeah.
been open to being taught by your patients, because that is where I think a lot of doctors go wrong, is the 5-minute appointment where you can't learn. There's no learning, on either side, right? Doctor can't teach, the patient can't teach the doctor can't teach the patient. And so there's no real great growth. But I love that you had that experience, because it enriches the people that get to come and see you, and it enriches yourself. How long did it take you to recover once you kind of started getting things figured out? I don't want to ask anything too personal if you don't want to share, super personal, but doing kind of what you're doing today, did you find it relatively easy to recover, or was it a long trudge?
Yeah, it was definitely trials and tribulations, and part of it was that I just didn't have the guidance that I needed from other practitioners, at that time. Um, and I know that I just wasn't able also to be vulnerable enough to reach out for help, because I was in the position that I was in, and I felt like I had to kind of wear that as a badge, and being able, I'm taking care of other people. I don't need other people to take care of myself. So it took a good 5 years, from that moment where I was like, okay, this is not right. I need to start looking for answers. It took me a good 5 years.
And did you have mold in your background too, or was it other things?
I did. Yeah, we had a moldy porch that we removed. There was also mold in the school that my daughter had been going to, that we volunteered a lot in. I had a lot of heavy metals. I grew up eating a lot of tuna fish, and I had mercury amalgams that I had removed. I I had a lot of chemical exposures, the pesticides and the plastics, but then I also had formaldehyde exposure from Gross Anatomy Lab. Um, and then there was trauma. There's trauma with a big T, trauma with a little t, where trauma with the big T oftentimes is what people normally think of when they think of trauma. They think of significant abuse, sexual abuse, mental, emotional, physical abuse. But there's also the little t trauma, which is anything that makes you see your life as not safe. And so for me, there was, relationships that I had growing up with my parents, with my siblings, where, we're all kind of fighting for our own needs per se, and as a child, you just want to make sure that you survive. And so you're going to bend over backwards in order to be able to make sure your parents get their needs met, but then that doesn't necessarily serve you. So oftentimes the accommodations that you make serve you then, but now don't serve you once you get to be an adult, And so I was hustling for my worthiness to be the best that I could be, so that, people would give me kudos, and so that I would be seen in a certain way. I had rejection of some peer groups when I was growing up. That was really hard for me. So a lot of those things kind of played in. And so I was going through my own therapy and my own work, my own mental health, in addition to all the physical stuff to remove those toxins out of my body, that really enabled me to get over it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of people will resonate and maybe think on their own health and where they're plateaued based on what you shared. I appreciate it. What advice would you give someone today who's not seeing a doctor or a practitioner, and is just kind of, they're just being turned on to this world, right? Because this is a whole different world, right? If you're coming over from mainstream allopathy to what we do, it's like, that's crazy quackery, right? I mean, that's the perception of the general public, right? I'm a realist in that way. What would you say to that person who's interested? Where can they start to get the biggest bang for their buck, spending the least amount of money, and making the biggest amount of difference in their health?
So the first place to start, if finances are a challenge, is going to be working on nervous system and limbic system and amygdala retraining. So, you know, I'm generally and that's kind of like working on the trauma stuff, even if you don't think you have trauma. And this is also really helpful for people who have MCAS and they've got that sensitivities, more sensitivities to supplements and otherwise, and foods. And so I'm generally recommending biology of trauma with Amy Apigian. I'm recommending the Gupta program with Ashok Gupta, where those are lower cost options and they can make a really significant difference in people's health. We also have a mindset component to our program and a 4-step mindset practice that kind of complements those things. But it's really the whole picture that needs to be addressed. So it's kind of like looking first at the number of causes that somebody has. We've got a free find your causes checklist on our website. If people want to check that out, we're based off your symptoms. You can know 75% of your causes after about an hour of going through this checklist. And then working on that nervous system, limbic system, or amygdala retraining. Those are just different parts of the brain, the components of the nervous system that can really be helpful. And then figuring out what your causes are, and then finding somebody who actually is specializing in what you're dealing with. So, if you want to learn how to play the piano, you don't go to your mechanic unless they're, a piano virtuoso, right? You want to go to somebody who's actually an expert in that, right? So you look for somebody like Peter or me who, if you've got chronic fatigue or long COVID, you want to make sure that it's on their website, that this is what they do all the time, because that's just going to compress time for you. Because, there's so many people out there who can tell you, I've been sick for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? We still see those people who we're having calls with. And so much of it is because they've been messing around with the local naturopath, functional medicine doc, whoever, who is working on those 90% who they can get better. And part of it is that most docs don't want to work on heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma. Each of those things is like getting an additional degree for us because of the amount of time, energy, and knowledge that we need to acquire those things. So if you want to shorten the amount of time that it takes for you to get better, you need to find somebody who's already done it, doing it for a lot of people, has reviews on their website that says that they've done it for a lot of people, and that you resonate with, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with them, so you get on a call with them or you watch some videos and you see, is this somebody whose philosophy I resonate with? And then the last thing I would say is for folks who are more conventional, all of the conventional folks that I work with who are successful are more open. So, I spoke the other day with a doctor in physical therapy, highly intellectual and was at a point, also had mast cell activation syndrome, so highly sensitive to things, had long COVID and also chronic fatigue. And now they were open because they realized that they weren't having success with the conventional establishment or even with functional medicine providers. They were now more open to other things, because I was asking them about muscle testing, because we teach sway testing and pendulum testing because we find that that's just a different source of data. This is applied kinesiology. And so she said, yeah, I'm now open to those things. I wasn't open to those before, but now I know enough to know that that in order for me to get better, I have to be open to these things.
Yeah, well said. I think, if you keep doing what you've been doing and you're not getting a result, then you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. And so to be open to something new is of course important on that journey. Interesting. So great advice. I love it. This has been a very good interview. I appreciate you, appreciate what you do, appreciate the work you do. And I really appreciate your time today and helping teach our audience, hopefully, some things they can unpack after this and really go home and help themselves with.
Thanks so much for having me on, Peter. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's good seeing you, and maybe we'll do part 2 here in the future.
Sounds good.
All right.